This is the Gold Frog Podcast, and I'm your host, Xavier Garrido. Since this is the first episode of the podcast, I just want to give a quick rundown on what you can expect from it. So my goal for this podcast is to be a sort of conversational, personal-based podcast. I just want to be able to have a conversation with my listeners, even if it is one-sided. So I'm mostly going to be covering things that are paranormal, pretty much anything that can vaguely fall under the category of paranormal. I mean, it could be cryptids. I will definitely be talking about cryptids. I have a nice long list of cryptids I want to talk about. I'll also be talking about conspiracy theories. I don't really want to talk about ones that have been overdone, such as JFK's assassination or, which group X, Y, or Z runs the government this week, stuff like that. Because I feel like that's just overdone and crass, really. So, yeah. We're also going to talk about films on this podcast. Whenever I see a scary movie, I'll probably talk about it here. If I see a really good, just any kind of movie, I'll also probably talk about it here because I really enjoy talking about films. So yeah, that's some things to look forward to. So generally speaking, my main goal is to provide a thought-provoking conversation with my listeners and introduce new topics to them. Occasionally, I'll have a guest on, but that probably won't be too often. We'll just see how it goes. This is the first episode. I have no idea where this is going to go. I hope for this to be maybe bi-weekly. I will definitely shoot to have at least one episode a week. So that being said, we're just going to jump right into it. The first two stories that we're going to talk about come from the area that I grew up in. I grew up in northeastern New Mexico. I was there for about the first 10 years or so of my life. And the first one is a story that I was told by my friend. And this story in particular was told to him by his father. So we're just going to call his father Jim. So Jim is working in a gas station really late at night. Now, for some context, you should know that the town where this takes place in is what you would call a highway town. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, it's usually a town in middle America where it's just basically essentially built around the highway. That's all there is really. So especially in this town, there's just one highway that passes right through it, and right along there's all these gas stations, and you're basically just meant to get your gas there and then leave the town. It's more of a stop. It's less of a place where people live for their entire life, although many people do, and more of a place where, you can say, "Hey, have you ever been to so and so?" "Oh yeah, I've passed through there on my way to the Rockies." So, it's just something like that. If it's during lunchtime, you can probably stop and eat at one of the two restaurants in the town. So, anyways, getting back on topic here. So imagine in the late 1970s or 1980s, or late 1970s, early 80s, you're a teenager and you're working late at night in one of these gas stations. It's so late that you haven't really seen anybody else come into the store, and all of a sudden, these lizards walk into the store. And when I say walk into the store, I mean literally walking on their hind legs, coming in the store, doing a T-pose. So you can imagine that Jim here is pretty scared of these lizards. So he goes, and after realizing that they're in the store, he just runs to the back room to go get a broom to maybe defend himself from these ravenous lizards. Although, as it was told to me, they were just kind of walking around in there. So he goes to go grab the broom, and as soon as he comes out of the door, he sees them run right back outside. And he goes outside to chase after them to make sure, I guess, they're gone. Guess what direction the UFO goes in? It goes in the direction of Roswell, New Mexico. Now, I believe that last part there was added in for dramatic effect, but I don't think that somebody would just make up a story about some weird lizards running in the store. So I wanted to dissect this a little bit. So first things first, I'm going to talk about, the most crazy theory on the explanation for this, and we're going to end on what I think really happened. So if we're going to stick with the alien side of the story, I was thinking maybe that these were the aliens, although the lizards themselves were the aliens, and these were not big lizards. These are tiny lizards, maybe medium-sized lizards. So that kind of clashes, right? Usually, when you talk about aliens and they're lizards, you're talking about like reptilians, and those are like humanoids, and it just doesn't really fit. So I was thinking, maybe these aliens were controlling these lizards, and I thought that would be a kind of cool twist to this story. So I looked it up, and there's tons of stuff about human mind control from aliens and stuff. And I feel kind of crazy talking about it now, but I was looking into the various methods and et cetera, et cetera. And when it comes down to it, I was kind of surprised that I couldn't find anything on animal mind control propagated by aliens. Now, as that came out of my mouth, I feel a little bit crazy, but to elaborate, to me, it would make sense if there would be a lot of talk about aliens, controlling animals, mind controlling them, because, if say I was an alien, right? It would make sense if I wanted to do something, I would, abduct one human and turn them into like a sleeper cell so that they could work for me and do my bidding, Instead of them working for Russia, it would be like them working for me, the Galactic Confederation of Kirklands or something like that. That was my thing, right? I was thinking, yeah, that is pretty plausible in a conspiratorial kind of mindset. So why not animals? Why is there nothing on animals being controlled by aliens? As a segue, there's nothing that I could find. If you can find something, please feel free to email me. My email will be in the description. So that was my first lead, so to say. So then I was thinking, yeah, the lizards were obviously not the aliens in the story, because that wouldn't really make much sense, and it would be a little bit too coincidental that the aliens happen to look exactly like lizards. So I was trying to research what kind of lizards it could be. Now, I know that in New Mexico, in that area, there's a lizard called the horned toad, or the horny toad as we call it. And I know I just said toad, but it is a lizard, and they're the ones that are famous for shooting blood out of their eyes. But that didn't really match the description of the lizard in the story. When I was told the story, the lizards had like these stripes on their back, kind of like I guess like a like a lizard, or a zebra. Yeah, kind of like a zebra. I think that's what I was told. But yeah, so I was looking up lizards in New Mexico, and as soon as I saw this lizard, I was very happy. So the lizard that I came across that this is the most likely to be, at least based on the description, is the Gila monster. Now, the Gila monster is indigenous to more arid climates of New Mexico and South America, I believe. I could be wrong. I didn't do too much research on the Gila monster. And I was almost certain that this could have been a thing, because I know that from previous research, that lizards walk on their back legs when they're running fast sometimes. The most famous example is a basilisk, also called the Jesus Christ lizard. They're famous for running on their back legs and being fast enough to run on water. So I was thinking that this is a pretty good lead. So I searched on YouTube Gila monster running, because that just seems like, I just wanted to confirm before I got on here and said, yep, it was a Gila monster. I looked up Gila monster running, and I almost almost died laughing, because in the video I expected the lizard to just shoot off like a car and just run away. But in the video, it is indeed running away, but it really is moving pretty slow. I'd say maybe double the speed that a tortoise can walk. So, as far as them standing on their back legs to run around, I don't think that it could have been the Gila monster. However, I think it is possible that with enough conviction, a Gila monster could, in fact, stand on its back legs for a little bit. So that would be my first explanation. That's my head theory for the real explanation behind the story. It was late at night. When you haven't slept in a long time, you start to see things. It was also in the late 70s, but that's an aside. This lizard runs in the store, and it really spooked you. And the way you remember it, maybe as you remember it, it seemed like it was walking on its back legs. Maybe it really was. And for it to be a Gila monster, I really do think that a Gila monster ran into that store that fateful night. I really do believe that a Gila monster ran into that store. Do I believe that Jim walked outside and there was a UFO headed towards Roswell? That seems a little bit too good to be true. Our second story is going to be about my family's history with La Llorona. For those of you who don't know, La Llorona is a Mexican legend about a woman who is a ghost. And the story goes kind of like this. So she is a very poor, very, very poor woman living in Mexico. However, she is also very beautiful. And this beauty catches the attention of a nobleman who passes through the village one day. And he really loves the way she looks, and he really just wants to marry her. This is the kind of generic sort of Disney style sort of romance. And he goes to tell his father. And of course, his father, being the rich whatever, he's disapproving and yada yada, right? So they go back and they build a village and a house, and eventually they have two boys as a family. So one day the father decides that he's going to leave, and he never comes back. And eventually he does go through the town again in a carriage, and the mother is excited to see him again. And as she gets closer, she notices that there's another woman in the carriage with him. And feeling so emotional, she commits a crime of passion. Now, the crime in particular is that she takes her two young boys, who were babies or, maybe young toddlers, depending on who you ask, and she takes them and she throws them into a nearby river. And after she realizes what she has just done, she herself then jumps into the river as well to kill herself. And the story goes, as she appears at the gates of heaven, she's turned back because of what she has done, and she's forced to walk the earth forever, crying and whining about her children and what she did to them. And as it so turns out, that this seems like your average fairy tale, maybe a little bit German influenced. I suspect that it was designed to keep children around from rivers. She's usually said to appear near rivers and bodies of water. So realistically speaking, maybe this is one of those kind of fairy tales. So as far as my family's personal history with this ghostly entity, and this is probably the only ghost story I'll ever tell on the podcast because it's the only one I have. My uncle was in his room when he was very young, maybe around 10, and it was nighttime and he was going to bed. And outside of his window, he hears screaming and just shrieking. And having heard this legend, he runs to my grandmother, and he tells her what happened, and she consoles him and makes him know that everything's going to be okay, and things go along as normal. And I guess that's somewhat of a repressed memory for my uncle, because fast forward to whenever I'm 10 or so, and I'm visiting my grandmother, and I hear this screaming outside, and it really scares me. And it wasn't too late that everybody was already asleep, so I just ran into the living room, and I was really freaking out because I've never heard of La Llorona prior to this point in my life. And of course, from a very young age, I was very skeptical. So my grandparents knew this, and they told me, "Oh, the cats make that noise at nighttime, and don't worry about it." And then, of course, word gets around to my uncle, and he's just like, "Why didn't you try to scare him like that? How come I was the only one to get the scary story?" So yeah, as it turns out, it was cats in the backyard. And the reason why it was such a coincidence that he heard it and also I heard it is that behind the house there was many cats. And when I say many cats, I don't just mean like there's many cats, like a bunch of alley cats. That usually when our neighbor had a house behind us, that's just kind of how it is sometimes in more rural areas. You don't necessarily have a neighbor who lives right next to you, but they were behind us. And they had a garage. And usually when you have a garage, you usually put a car in there, or you'll have a workshop, or, just any sort of something. Or maybe you just store a bunch of junk in it. But this house, I'm not exactly sure how it happened. It became like a nest for cats, and just oh, it's the worst thing ever. In my 20 years on this planet, I have never seen that garage door open, and the only thing that comes in and out through a little crack in the bottom is cats. Just dozens of cats, and it's horrible. And the main reason I told you guys this story is because it's it's an explanation for a paranormal event that happened to my uncle. As he grew up and eventually he figured out, oh, that's the sound of cats having sex. But, in the moment that was an extremely scary thing for him, and he probably grew up thinking that. And a lot of people who, believe in ghosts and what have you, they experience something scary in the younger stages of their life, and they never really get the closure that, hey, it was this thing. And sometimes, and it happens in your adulthood, and you still don't have an explanation for whatever happened. So I just wanted to add that in there. That's part of the reason why I don't believe in ghosts, actually, is that story in particular. It's just like, something scary happened to you. Oh, well, here's the explanation. So yeah, it just kind of like set me up to be skeptical about ghosts for the rest of my life. So that was the first episode of the podcast. If you have any questions for me or would like to give me suggestions for topics to cover in the future, you can contact me at my email, goldfrogpodcast@gmail.com. I would also like constructive criticism. That would be good. So, all in all, I just hope you guys had a good time listening, and I'll see you on the flip side.